When my daughter-in-law slid the documents across the dining room table, she smiled as if she had already won. The papers looked harmless enough. A few signatures. A few legal terms. Nothing dramatic. At least, that's what she wanted me to believe. "Mom," she said sweetly, folding her hands together. "This is just a formality." My son nodded beside her.
"Yeah, Mom."
"It's only paperwork." I looked from one face to the other. Then I looked down at the papers again. The family farm stretched across nearly 200 acres of rolling green hills outside Spokane. My husband and I had spent 40 years building it together. Every fence post, every barn, every apple tree, every inch of that land carried a memory. It wasn't just property. It was our life's work. And now my son and daughter-in-law wanted me to sign something. I already knew exactly what they thought. They thought I was old. They thought I was lonely. They thought I didn't understand business. Most importantly, they thought I trusted them completely. That assumption would become their biggest mistake. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 71 years old. And I learned a long time ago that people reveal their true intentions when they think you've stopped paying attention. 3 years earlier, my husband Harold passed away unexpectedly. The farm became quieter after that. Too quiet. For a while, my son Daniel visited often. Every weekend. Every holiday. Every family gathering. Then, he married Brittany. Slowly, everything changed. At first, Brittany seemed charming. She brought homemade pies. She complimented the farm. She called me Mom. She always knew exactly what to say. But some people don't show you who they are immediately. They let you get comfortable first. Within a year, Brittany had convinced Daniel that the farm wasn't being managed properly. According to her, I was stuck in the past. She talked constantly about modernization, expansion, investments, development opportunities. Every conversation somehow ended with money. One evening during dinner, she casually mentioned selling part of the orchard. "Those trees aren't making enough profit," she said. I nearly dropped my fork. Those trees had been planted by Harold himself. Daniel immediately agreed with her. We could make a lot more money doing something else with the land. Something inside me tightened. Not anger. Not yet. Just concern. Because for the first time, I realized they didn't see the farm the same way I did. To me, it was family. To them, it was potential profit. Over the following months, Brittany became increasingly involved in farm decisions nobody had asked her to make. She criticized workers, questioned expenses, suggested replacing long-time employees, people who had worked beside my husband for decades, people who helped build everything we had. One afternoon, I overheard Brittany speaking on the phone while she thought nobody was around. "I swear," she laughed, "once the property is in our name, we'll be able to do whatever we want." I stopped walking. The hallway suddenly felt very quiet.
"Property
in our name. Not if. When. That conversation stayed with me. I didn't confront her. I didn't argue. I simply started paying closer attention. And what I discovered concerned me far more than I expected. Daniel and Brittany weren't doing well financially. Far from it. They drove expensive vehicles, took luxury vacations, bought designer furniture, posted smiling photos online. But appearances can be deceiving. Bills were piling up. The credit cards were nearly maxed out. Several business ventures Brittany had pushed had failed badly. Yet they continued spending money they didn't have. Then one day, Daniel asked if we could talk privately. His voice sounded nervous. We sat together on the porch overlooking the fields. The same porch where I'd spent countless evenings with Harold. Daniel avoided eye contact. Finally, he cleared his throat. "We've been discussing the future of the farm." I already knew where the conversation was heading.
"Oh,
"We think it would be easier if ownership transferred now." There it was. Not later. Not someday.
Now.
I remained calm. What would be easier? Daniel hesitated. Brittany found some advisors. Of course she had. They believed transferring everything early would simplify estate planning. I almost smiled. That excuse sounded rehearsed. Because it was. The next week, Brittany arrived carrying folders full of documents. She spoke confidently. Too confidently. She explained tax benefits, legal protections, asset management strategies. Everything sounded polished, professional, convincing. But something felt off. Very off. After they left that evening, I made a phone call. Not to Daniel.
Not to Brittany.
To someone they had completely forgotten about. My attorney, Charles Mercer. Charles had handled our family's legal affairs for nearly 30 years. The next morning, I drove into town and placed the documents on his desk. He read silently. Then his eyebrows rose. A few minutes later, he looked up. "Eleanor." "Yes, these aren't estate planning documents." I wasn't surprised. "What are they?" Charles removed his glasses. "They transfer operational authority and future control of nearly every major asset connected to the farm." Silence filled the office. Outside the window, traffic moved normally. Inside, everything changed. So, if I sign these? Charles nodded. They gain control. I leaned back in my chair, not shocked, not hurt, just disappointed. Very disappointed. Because my son hadn't come to me honestly. He'd come with a script written by someone else. Someone who saw the farm as a prize, not a legacy. Charles folded his hands. What do you want to do? I stared at the documents for a long moment. Then a slow smile appeared. The kind of smile that comes when a puzzle finally makes sense. For months, Brittany had been acting like victory was inevitable. Like ownership was already hers. Like all she needed was one signature. The funny thing was, she was absolutely right. I was going to sign.
Just not the paper she thought.
Because 6 months earlier, after hearing that phone conversation in the hallway, I had quietly made arrangements of my own. Arrangements nobody knew about. Not Daniel. Not Brittany. Nobody. And if Brittany was determined to play a game involving contracts and ownership, then she was about to discover I knew the rules far better than she did. The following Saturday, I invited Daniel and Brittany to the farm for lunch. The weather was perfect. Sunlight spilled across the fields.
A
gentle breeze moved through the apple orchard. Everything looked peaceful. Brittany arrived wearing a bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. Daniel followed behind her carrying another stack of documents. The same documents. The same trap. Only this time, they were convinced I was finally ready to cooperate. As we sat around the large wooden dining table, Brittany immediately steered the conversation toward business. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. Mom, have you had a chance to review everything? I sipped my iced tea. I have. Her smile widened. And I looked directly at her. It's very interesting. For a brief moment, excitement flashed across her face. She thought she had won. Daniel relaxed visibly. The tension disappeared from his shoulders. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because unlike Brittany, my son wasn't naturally manipulative. He was simply weak. Weak people often become tools in the hands of stronger personalities. And Brittany knew exactly how to use that weakness. She reached for the folder. If you're comfortable moving forward, we can sign everything today. I smiled. I'd be happy to sign. The silence that followed lasted less than a second. Then Brittany nearly laughed with relief. Daniel looked as though a giant weight had been lifted from his chest. Neither of them noticed Charles Mercer walking through the front door. My attorney entered carrying a leather briefcase. Brittany's smile immediately froze. Charles? She asked. I nodded. I thought it would be wise to have legal counsel present. Nobody objected. They couldn't. After all, anyone refusing legal oversight would look suspicious. Charles sat down and calmly reviewed the documents. The room became noticeably quieter. Then he produced a second folder. A much thinner one. This, Charles said, placing it in front of me, is the updated version we discussed. Brittany frowned. What updated version? Charles smiled politely. Mrs. Whitmore requested several modifications. The color drained slightly from Brittany's face. Not enough for Daniel to notice. But I noticed. People reveal a great deal through tiny reactions. She suddenly became very interested in reading every page. Her eyes moved rapidly, line after line, paragraph after paragraph. Then she stopped. Something was different. Something she didn't like. These aren't the same documents, she said carefully.
No, Charles y played.
They're not. Daniel looked confused. What changed? Charles folded his hands. The farm remains protected under a family preservation trust. Daniel blinked. A what? I watched both of them closely. Brittany's expression hardened immediately. Daniel still looked lost. The trust, Charles explained, ensures the land cannot be sold, subdivided, developed, leveraged against debt, or transferred without strict conditions. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Brittany spoke. What conditions? Charles glanced at me. I nodded. He continued. The farm must remain operational for future generations. Any manager appointed by Mrs. Whitmore must meet performance standards and annual review requirements. Brittany's jaw tightened. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. What does that mean exactly? It means ownership remains protected permanently. The atmosphere changed instantly. The pleasant lunch disappeared. The masks began slipping. Brittany forced a smile. So, basically nothing changes. Oh, things change, Charles replied. Mrs. Whitmore intends to appoint a successor. That got their attention.
Fast.
Daniel leaned forward. Me? I remained silent. Charles continued. Possibly.
Possibly.
One simple word. And Brittany hated it. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't interested in possibility. She wanted certainty, control, ownership,
Power.
The entire reason she had pushed for these documents was because she believed the farm represented financial freedom. But the trust destroyed that dream. No future sale. No development deal. No cash-out opportunity. No million-dollar payday. Lunch ended shortly afterward. Daniel seemed disappointed. Brittany seemed furious. As they drove away, I stood on the porch and watched their vehicle disappear down the road. Then I turned toward Charles. "What do you think?" He sighed. "I think she's not finished." Neither was I. Over the next few weeks, strange things began happening. Small things at first. Rumors spread among employees. Whispers about retirement. Stories suggesting I was losing my memory. Comments questioning whether I was capable of managing the farm. Most people ignored them, but not everyone. One afternoon, my farm manager, Tom Henderson, knocked on my office door. Tom had worked beside Harold for 27 years. If there was anyone I trusted, it was him. He looked concerned. "Eleanor. What's wrong?" Tom hesitated. "Someone's been talking to the staff." I already knew who. "Brittany?" He nodded. "She's telling people major changes are coming." I leaned back. "What kind of changes?" Tom's expression darkened. "Layoffs." The room suddenly felt colder. Layoffs. The very workers who helped build this farm. The families who depended on these jobs. The people Brittany viewed as expenses. I thanked Tom and told him not to worry. But inside, my concerns grew. Because Brittany wasn't thinking long-term. She wasn't thinking about preserving the farm. She was thinking about extracting value. There was a huge difference. A month later, another surprise arrived. Charles called me early one morning. His voice sounded unusually serious. "Eleanor, I need you to come into town." "Why?" "Because you're going to want to see this." 30 minutes later, I sat in his office. He handed me a packet of papers. I read the first page, then the second, then the third, and finally I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. Brittany had secretly met with commercial developers. Developers interested in purchasing sections of the farm.
Développer offering millions. Millions.
For land she didn't even own. For land she couldn't legally sell. For land protected by a trust she clearly hadn't bothered to understand. Charles shook his head. "She signed preliminary discussions." "Can she do that?" "She can talk." He smiled. "But she can't deliver." For the first time, I realized how desperate she had become. She wasn't planning for the future anymore. She was counting on the future. She needed the money.
Badly.
And that meant something bigger was happening behind the scenes. A week later, the truth finally surfaced. Daniel arrived alone.
No Brittany. No.
Rehearsed speeches.
No confidence smiles.
Just Daniel.
He looked exhausted.
Older. Defeated. When he sat down across from me, he couldn't even meet my eyes. "Mom." I knew immediately. There was more. Much more. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Brittany has debts." I said nothing. "Big debts." Still nothing. His voice cracked. "The investments failed." My heart sank. Not because of the money. Because everything suddenly made sense. The pressure. The manipulation. The obsession with ownership. The desperation. It had never been about preserving the farm.
It had been about saving themselves.
Daniel buried his face in his hands. And for the first time, I realized the real storm hadn't arrived yet. It was just beginning. Daniel sat silently at my kitchen table for nearly 5 minutes before speaking again. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched across the fields. The farm looked as peaceful as ever. But inside the house, everything had changed. "How bad is it?" I finally asked. Daniel swallowed hard. "Worse than I told you." I wasn't surprised. People rarely reveal the full truth the first time, especially when shame is involved. He stared at his coffee. "About 2 years ago, Brittany convinced me to invest in a luxury resort project. I remained quiet. It failed." "How much?" "Almost $300,000. I closed my eyes briefly. That was only the beginning. I could tell. There was another project. Of course there was. And another. By the time he finished talking, the total exceeded $1 million. Failed investments. Private loans. High-interest lenders. Business partnerships that collapsed. Credit lines stretched beyond their limits. The deeper he talked, the clearer the picture became. Brittany wasn't trying to secure the farm's future. She was trying to save herself from financial disaster. And she believed my farm was her escape route. When Daniel finally finished, he looked exhausted. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He laughed bitterly. "Because Brittany said we could fix it." "By taking control of the farm?" He lowered his head. The silence answered for him. For the first time in months, I didn't feel angry. I felt sad. Because my son had spent years chasing shortcuts. And shortcuts almost always lead somewhere dangerous. After Daniel left, I called Charles. We needed to prepare. Not because Brittany could legally take the farm. She couldn't. But desperate people don't always act rationally. And Brittany was becoming increasingly desperate. That fact worried me. A lot. 3 days later, I received proof. At 8 in the morning, Tom Henderson called. His voice sounded alarmed. Eleanor, you need to get here. I'm already here.
No.
The South Orchard. My stomach tightened. 20 minutes later, I arrived. Several workers stood near the entrance. Nobody looked happy.
Tom walked toward me.
Then pointed. I froze. Bright orange markings covered dozens of apple trees. Survey markers. Construction markers. The kind used by development companies. My blood ran cold. Who did this? Tom handed me a business card. A commercial development company. The same company Brittany had secretly contacted.
I stared at it.
Unbelieving. Furious. Then another worker approached. They came yesterday.
Who?
Some surveyors. What did they say? The worker hesitated. They said future owners wanted preliminary measurements. Future owners. I felt something shift inside me. For months, Brittany had treated the farm like it already belonged to her. Now she was acting on that belief. The problem was simple. It didn't. Not even close. I immediately called Charles. Within 2 hours, legal notices were being prepared. By evening, every developer involved received formal warnings. The message was crystal clear.
No discussions. No negotiations.
No authority. No future sale. Case closed. I thought that would end it. I was wrong. The next Sunday, Brittany arrived at my house without warning. Alone. She marched up the front steps and knocked loudly. Not politely. Demandingly. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. The confident woman who once smiled constantly was gone. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. Her hair was messy. Her expression looked strained. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Can we talk? I stepped aside. She entered. Neither of us sat down immediately. The room felt tense. Heavy. Finally, Brittany spoke. You've been turning everyone against us. I nearly laughed.
No.
You have.
No, Brittany.
I looked directly into her eyes. Your choices did that. Her face hardened. You don't understand. Then explain. For the next 20 minutes, she talked. And talked. And talked. Excuses. Justifications.
Blame.
Everyone was responsible except her. The economy. Bad partners. Bad timing. Bad luck. At no point did she take responsibility. Not once. Then she finally reached the real reason she came. The farm could solve everything. There it was. The truth.
At last.
She leaned forward. If you transfer ownership now, we can restructure the debts. After everything. After the lies. After the manipulation. After the secret meetings. She still believed I would hand it over. The level of entitlement was astonishing. Let me ask you something.
What?
If the farm wasn't valuable, would you still care about it? For the first time, she didn't answer immediately. And that told me everything. Her silence was louder than any words. I stood. The conversation was over. Brittany. Her voice sharpened. What? The answer is no. Her eyes widened. You can't do this. I already have. You owe your family. I smiled sadly.
No.
I walked toward the door. I raised my family. I opened it. I don't owe anyone my life's work. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house. And somehow I knew that wasn't the end. It felt more like a beginning. The next morning, everything exploded. At 7:12 a.m., Charles called. Eleanor. His voice sounded tense. Very tense. What happened? You need to see the news. I turned on the television. Then my jaw dropped. A local business website had published an article. The headline read, Family Farm Dispute Raises Questions About Elderly Owners' Decision-Making. I stared at the screen. Shock quickly became anger. The article implied I was confused, unstable, unable to manage my own affairs. It suggested the farm needed younger leadership. My hands clenched, because I knew exactly where it came from.
Brittany. Not directly. She was smarter than that.
But the fingerprints were obvious. The timing, the narrative, the wording, all of it. For the first time, she wasn't trying to take the farm quietly. She was trying to pressure me publicly. What Brittany didn't understand was that she just made a catastrophic mistake. Because the moment she attacked my reputation, she stopped this from being a family disagreement and turned it into a war she couldn't win. That same afternoon, Charles arrived with a thick folder. I looked down at it. What is this? He smiled. The truth. Inside were financial records, emails, contracts, debt disclosures, documents we had spent weeks gathering.
Proof.
Real proof. Not rumors. Not accusations. Evidence. Lots of it. Charles leaned back. If Brittany wants attention. He tapped the folder. We can give her attention. For the first time in months, I felt completely calm. Because the game was finally over. And Brittany had no idea what was about to happen. The following week became the longest week of Brittany's life. And she had no idea it was coming. For months, she had been operating from a position of confidence. She believed she controlled the narrative. She believed she understood the legal system. She believed she could pressure me into surrendering the farm. Most importantly, she believed nobody knew the full truth. She was wrong on every count. 3 days after the article appeared, Charles held a press conference. Not a dramatic one. Not sensational. Just factual. Professional.
Calm.
The exact opposite of Brittany's strategy. Local reporters attended. Several agricultural organizations sent representatives. A few community leaders showed up as well. The Whitmore farm wasn't just another business. For decades, it had been part of the community. People paid attention. When Charles stepped forward, he didn't attack Brittany. He didn't insult her. He simply presented facts. Document after document. Record after record. Evidence after evidence. The room grew quieter with every page. By the end, nobody was talking about my age anymore. Nobody was questioning my judgment. Instead, people were asking different questions. Questions Brittany didn't want answered. Questions about the debts. Questions about the failed investments. Questions about unauthorized negotiations with developers. Questions about why someone would attempt to sell land they didn't own. The public narrative shifted almost instantly. And once public opinion changes direction, it moves fast. Very fast. That evening, Daniel appeared at my door again. This time, he looked completely broken. Not angry. Not defensive. Broken. I invited him inside. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he took a deep breath. She lied to me. I wasn't surprised. What about? His laugh sounded hollow. Almost everything. The word seemed painful to say. I thought we were building a future.
He stared down at his hands.
Turns out we were just covering losses. I listened quietly. She never told me how much debt existed. His voice cracked. She kept borrowing. The silence between us felt heavy. Years of bad decisions. Years of ignored warning signs. Years of excuses. Now, everything was collapsing at once. Daniel looked up. Mom. I already knew what he wanted to say. But this time, it wasn't about money. I'm sorry. Simple words. Yet they carried more weight than anything he'd said in years. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I nodded. Not because everything was forgiven. Not because the past disappeared. But because accountability had finally arrived. And accountability is where real change begins. 2 weeks later, Brittany's world collapsed completely. The lenders began calling. The investors wanted answers. The development deals vanished. Every shortcut she had relied upon disappeared. One by one. One after another. Then came the final blow. Daniel filed for divorce. The news spread quickly. Most people weren't surprised. Some relationships survive hardship. Others survive only while money is available. This one belonged to the second category. When the financial fantasy ended, the marriage followed. A month later, I received an unexpected letter. Not from Daniel. From Brittany. I almost threw it away. Almost. Instead, I opened it. The letter was only 3 pages long.
No demands.
No legal threats.
No
manipulation. For the first time since I'd known her, the words felt honest. She admitted she had become obsessed with wealth. She admitted she viewed the farm as a solution rather than a responsibility. She admitted she had convinced herself she deserved something she never earned. The final paragraph stayed with me. I spent years trying to own what you built. I never stopped to ask why you spent 40 years building it in the first place. I folded the letter carefully, then placed it inside a drawer. Not as a trophy. Not as revenge. As a reminder. Because greed rarely starts as greed. It usually starts as entitlement. A belief that someone else's sacrifice should belong to you. That autumn, the farm looked more beautiful than ever. The orchard produced one of its best harvests in years. Workers laughed again. The atmosphere felt lighter. Healthier. Peaceful. One morning, I walked through the apple trees just after sunrise. Golden light covered the fields. The air smelled fresh. For the first time in a long while, I felt Harold's presence. Not literally, but in the memories surrounding me. Every tree. Every fence. Every building. The farm still carried his fingerprints. And mine. Exactly as it should. Several months later, I made an important decision. Not about ownership. About leadership. I created a training program inside the farm. Young agricultural students could learn directly from experienced workers. The goal wasn't profit. It was preservation. Knowledge. Legacy. The trust would continue protecting the land long after I was gone. Future generations would benefit. Not because they inherited wealth, but because they inherited opportunity. That difference mattered. A lot. One spring afternoon, Daniel joined me on the porch. The same porch where this entire chapter had begun. Things were different now. He had moved into a small house nearby. He worked hard, paid his debts, lived modestly.
No luxury vehicles. No risky investments. No shortcuts.
Just honest work. For the first time in years, he seemed genuinely happy. We sat quietly watching the fields. Eventually he spoke. You knew, didn't you? I smiled. Knew what? That Brittany wanted the farm.
I
Laughed softly. Daniel, she started planning before she understood what the farm actually was. He nodded slowly, then looked across the property. I used to think this place was worth millions. And now, his answer came immediately. It's worth a lot more than that. For the first time, I knew he understood. Not the value, the meaning. Those are two very different things. A year later, visitors often asked me the same question. Why didn't you simply sell? Why didn't you walk away? Why fight so hard? My answer never changed. Because some things are bigger than money. The farm wasn't valuable because of the land. It was valuable because of the lives connected to it. The memories, the sacrifices, the history, the people. Money measures price. It doesn't measure meaning. And that was the lesson Brittany learned too late. She spent years trying to take ownership of something she never truly understood. By the time she realized its real value, it was already gone. As for me, I still wake up every morning and watch the sunrise over the orchard. I still walk the same paths Harold and I walked decades ago. And every time I do, I remember something important. The greatest inheritance isn't property. It isn't money. It isn't power. It's character. Because land can be transferred. Money can disappear. Buildings can crumble. But character follows you everywhere. And in the end, that's the one thing nobody can steal.